All right, so we've come to the opinion portion. So if you don't want my input, now is the time to get out. My rating system isn't based on my personal opinion of the candidates in general, but actually a standard that it seems all parents want to know about. 5 categories are how they'll be rated. The 5 categories are experience in education, experience with kids, knowledge of position, inclusivity, and community involvement. Each one earns a teacup. For inclusivity, I'm also including the use of Spanish in their campaign materials because our student population is 54% Hispanic, where many of their parents in our area who don't speak English as their first language. And they also want to know where candidates stand on these issues. So to start, we've got Maria. Maria is so well qualified for this position. It would be an absolute shame if we didn't retain her, especially since there are no candidates running against her that I feel are qualified. On my rating system, she gets 5 teacups. 1 for her experience in education, 1 for her experience with kids, 1 for her knowledge of the position, as she did not make any false promises and is currently on the board. 1 for inclusivity for her stances as well as including Spanish in her campaign, and 1 for her extensive service to our community. Matt. You sexually harassed one of my moderators. You refused to answer direct questions and either blocked or had the admins you work with block anyone in groups you're a part of who had a different opinion than yours. You falsely and dramatically accused me of silencing you when you were being a bully. You are not qualified for this position, and I believe you to be a danger to our community. You get 0 teacups. 0 for your experience in education, because you obviously never worked with educators. 0 for experience with kids, because I didn't see any work history or service with kids and parents. 0 for knowledge of position, because you continually made false and inflammatory promises that you can't deliver on. 0 for inclusivity, because of your abhorrent position on the gender unicorn, which you call indoctrination, as well as having no Spanish campaign materials. And finally, 0 for service, because as far as I can tell, you don't volunteer or help our community in any way other than to make it more divided, which I gotta say is the opposite of service. Tina. Sexuality and trans issues are not a choice. I just need to clarify that real quick. Blatant racism isn't commonplace. Are you joking? That was such a tone-deaf thing to say. If you actually spoke to the people of color in our community, they would tell you that blatant, loud, and horrendous racism still take place in our community. Just because you don't personally experience it doesn't mean it's not happening. I've heard from our local people of color too many times to count that they often get horrendous slurs yelled at them while walking down the street. Considering how our own community treated a local Black Lives Matter march, I can't believe anyone would think that racism isn't commonplace, even in our own valley. Protesters here in Wenatchee were stalked by gun-toting zealots, endured shouts of insults and slurs, were compared to rioters and looters, and all for trying to say that they didn't want people of color to die anymore at the hands of racist institutions. Tina, you get half a teacup. 0 in experience in education, as you only listed you went to school and have kids in school. Half a teacup for experience with kids because you did volunteer once for community Little League coaching. Having kids doesn't count here because it doesn't necessarily mean you have experience with other people's kids. 0 in knowledge for the position for making false promises and spreading misinformation. 0 in inclusivity because you seem intent on believing that love is love is some sort of pedophilia reference, and as far as I know, haven't changed your opinion in that regard, and you're agreeing with other homophobic people. So I'm not sure how you could be inclusive if you think that homosexuality and trans people are somehow inherently predatory. You also have no Spanish materials. And you get 0 for community involvement because I already gave you half a point for the Little League thing. Dr. Michelle Sandberg, you get 5 teacups. 1 for experience in education, as it is extensive. 1 for experience with kids because of your outreach to the schools, working with the students to help form a student panel, and your background in child psychology. 1 for knowledge of the position because you're currently serving and have made no false promises. 1 for inclusivity because of your work on DEI, as well as included a lot of Spanish in your campaign. And 1 for community involvement because the list is also extensive. Catherine. First, I want to talk about Catherine's largest donor, and this may or may not apply to a lot of you, but it's something that I think needs to be addressed. Her largest donor of $2,000, by far the largest of any campaign I've seen, happens to be the president of the board for an anti-choice group here in town. He regularly sets up protests to bully patients at Planned Parenthood and speaks at city council meetings to advocate against women's right to health care. The fact that he's backing her needs to be stated. All of Catherine's stances are pretty specifically the same as some of the other candidates, in that they cannot actually deliver on the promises they're making. Catherine, you get 0 teacups. 0 for experience in education, as far as I can tell. Just having 1 doesn't count. 0 for experience with kids, since I didn't see any service or school work that would expose you to working with kids. 0 for knowledge of the position for spreading misinformation and making misleading promises. 0 for inclusivity, based on the stance for sex ed and conflating DEI with CRT, and no Spanish to be found on your campaign materials. And 0 for community involvement because I didn't see any. Jennifer, I have an issue with candidates that are afraid to correct misinformation as well as spreading it. You don't have to be argumentative to correct someone, and we need to normalize having conversations like that in order to eradicate falsehoods so they don't spread. While Jennifer answered a lot of questions in a very centrist manner, she didn't correct false information when she saw it and campaigned with people who were actively spreading it. And she was also campaigning against CRT, which, as I've covered before, it is not, nor will it be in K through 12. I understand not wanting to answer a question over and over. So personally, I would have clarified that while you are against teaching kids a high-level college theory, and you know that it is not currently being taught or in any upcoming curriculum, you'll stick with that stance. Jennifer, you get 2.5 cups. 0 for experience in education, 1 for experience with kids, because you're a foster parent, and your experience as Mount Rainier Booster Club president and spending hours volunteering with kids in the community. You get 0.5 cup for knowledge of position, because while you have served on boards, you spread misinformation about the ability to affect state policy regarding mask mandates. You get 0.5 cup for inclusivity, because you are against the gender unicorn. Acknowledging someone's pronouns is not sex ed, but you did use some Spanish information on your website. And 1 for community involvement for being team mom for WHS girls swim, dive, and golf teams. Joel. Personally, Joel had a lot going for him. He said all the right words. He says he supports inclusivity and has a pretty centrist and even left-leaning campaign. He was respectful to me, and while I appreciate it, I would be remiss if I didn't mention his Twitter account I found. In it, he was a vocal supporter of former President Trump, who, as we know, is incredibly racist. He also took part in referencing COVID as the Chinese virus and Wuhan virus, saying, "Who eats bats?" He accused Democrats of ignoring riots, lootings, rapes, murders, theft, destruction allegedly by Antifa and BLM. He retweeted people who spread misinformation that the Red Dawn was upon us, compared Trump's response to COVID as Obama's response to the H1N1 flu, conflating the two as if COVID were not nearly as bad. He called people who sought sanctuary illegals, who we permitted to kill police, and conflated it with someone who faked a hate crime, as well as telling people to get armed. He said that Dreamers barged into our country illegally and basically said they took our gerbs. He was pretty consistently demonizing Democrats, calling them the party of slaves, and retweeting people like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and spreading misinformation about Biden before the election. He spread so much misinformation over 2020 that it would be shocking to believe he changed. So really, I can't in good conscience believe any answers he's given, as they are in direct conflict with what he said online less than a year ago. Joel, you get 0 teacups. 0 for experience in education. 0 for experience with kids, because having kids doesn't count here. 0 for knowledge of position. 0 for inclusivity because of your abhorrent and pretty racist speech online. I can't even give you a half a point for including Spanish in your campaign materials because we know it's disingenuous. And 0 for service, because as far as I can tell, you don't volunteer to help the community either. I hope you've changed, Joel, and if you have, great. It's going to be quite a while before anyone in the left or center will trust your pretty meaningless words while you spread garbage online. Julie, there isn't much I can say about you, as you were very quiet during the campaign trail, but a lawyer knows that usually no comment is the best comment. Julie, you get 1.5 teacups. Half for experience in education, because while you're on the board, it doesn't look like you've worked with educators previously. And while your education is extensive, it doesn't count here. 0 for experience with kids, because while you do work on multiple boards, it doesn't look like they work directly with kids. Half a cup for knowledge of position, because while you do work on the board and other boards, and you made it without making any false promises, I have to subtract a half a point for not correcting the misinformation or publicly making a statement about it. Battling misinformation is everyone's job, and I can't have faith in someone holding an elected position to not speak up when it's important, even if it may upset some people who you want to vote for you. Half a cup for inclusivity, because while she knows the limits of state law, not making a statement about inclusivity is telling enough for me, but she did include Spanish in her campaign materials. And 0 for community service, because I didn't see any local service. Miranda, first I need to thank you for your brevity of answers. They left little to be interpreted and were directly to the point, which I appreciate. Miranda, you get 4.5 teacups. 1 for experience in education, as you were in leadership programs, tutoring kids through Gear Up and AVID in the Wenatchee School District, among more. 1 for experience with kids, as you were a youth program director and counselor for ROPES activities and tutored children directly. 1 for knowledge of position, because I didn't see you following the trend of the other challenging candidates, making false promises or spreading misinformation about the ability of a school board member. Half a cup for inclusivity, because while I appreciate your views to work toward in the community, you missed a step by not including Spanish in your campaign materials. 1 for community service, for all your work locally, including volunteering for the Special Olympics as a ski, track, and field coach. Arlette, I want to say I appreciated your answers and believe you're a great candidate. Arlette, you get 4 teacups. 0 for your background in education, because it was the one question you didn't answer, and as far as I know, you don't have much administrative educational experience yet. 1 for experience with kids, from your volunteer experience with cafe and tutoring kids among other activities. 1 for knowledge of the position, since you didn't spread any misinformation or make any false promises, as well as your experience with the board on the Strategic Planning Committee. 1 for inclusivity, for your work with the Wenatchee Pride Organization, views on inclusivity, as well as having Spanish in your campaign materials. 1 for community service, as it seems you're very involved in the local community. In conclusion, the 3 people that I'm voting for and are officially endorsed by this channel, as well as all the admins in our Inclusivity Facebook group, are, for position number 2, incumbent Maria Iniguez. For position number 4, incumbent Dr. Michelle Sandberg. And for position number 5, challenger Miranda Skaliski. Arlette was a close runner-up for endorsement. I am looking forward to seeing what she does in the future. My love for my local community is what has made me so passionate about the upcoming elections. Hopefully next time there won't be so much misinformation and I can spend more time on other projects or candidate races. Thank you for watching. If you think I've misrepresented anything or a candidate would like to clarify something that I've said, my inbox is open. I'm not perfect, and I'm never going to pretend I am. I'm just very opinionated. Ballots for the primary should already be in your mailbox. Make sure to return them by August 3rd so your voice can be heard. Ooh, that rhymed. Our current voting system isn't perfect, but it absolutely matters. A bill to introduce ranked choice voting is still sitting stalled in Washington state's legislature since March. SHB 1156. If you aren't sure what RCV is, watch our video explaining it and its history in the United States. If you have any questions or have a suggestion for the near future, let me know at info@progressivedevilry.com. And if you'd like to support what we do, then check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/progressivedevilry. Until then, let's make progress. Thanks for watching the first Stella's Communi-Tea.
Hit that subscribe button to stay updated with us. And any sources we've used in today's episode are below or are available on our website at progressivedevilry.com.